Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the very last day of the Mega SCO. This is our 3-day community kickoff summit. It's a mouthful. Today's event and the whole summit is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. If you are not aware, we are, of course, the world's largest and highest quality revenue leadership community, and our mission is to really create an environment for our members to answer the toughest revenue questions out there. If you're not a member yet, you'll be invited after the summit, and we hope that you'll join us. This summit, of course, would not be possible without our amazing partners you see here. Give them a little virtual claps. If you're in the chat, give them some thumbs up emojis. These sponsors are not only sponsoring this specific event, but they have sponsored the entire full 3 days of our summit, all of this amazing content. If you want to show them some love, you'll navigate to the top of your Goldcast page and you'll click that booths feature. And there should be some people in there that you can talk to, that you can interact with, and give them a little thanks for this. This week's summit has been full of the do's and the don'ts for your latest 2022 SCOs, whether you have been in sales or marketing or customer success or product, whatever you are in, we have had content for you. This, unfortunately, sadly, is the very last event of our summit. And I'm going to give a little agenda for today for this session. I'm going to quickly go over some housekeeping notes. Our speakers are going to introduce themselves and they're going to get straight to the content. And they're going to answer your questions using that Q&A feature. They're going to respond to you in the little chat feature, give you some little emojis right back, and then we'll wrap up. And you all get to go home, or if you're in San Francisco, hopefully you're joining our in-person happy hour. Before we dive into the content today, those housekeeping notes that I just mentioned, yes, this is being recorded. We know everyone's going to ask. We are not going to leave you hanging without this amazing content to refer back to always, so you will get access to the recording. And 2, we love for this to be super interactive. If you can see our chat feature, please give us some commentary, give our speakers some support, send out your best emojis. You will see me in the chat emojiing it up all the time. We love to have your interaction. And without further ado, let's get started. Our amazing moderator for this panel is Will Foley. Will, take it away.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you to all of the Modern Sales Pro team, as well as all of the sponsors for this great event. I always feel so grateful that I get invited to be the moderator. I get the front row seat to these amazing conversations, and I couldn't be more excited for the topic at hand today. As a revenue operations leader over the last 5 years, I can't think of a more important topic to get right. And I think everyone on this panel has gotten some things right, but we've also learned a lot about the things that we didn't do right. So we'll be sharing all the secrets today with you as we discuss how to use comp to stop losing reps. So I am really excited to first hand it off to our panel to introduce themselves. And I'm going to kick it over to Yoni to kick us off.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Yonatan Rouache. I'm the VP of Sales at Varicent, and I'm based out of cold Minneapolis, where it's negative 10 degrees this morning. So hope you're all enjoying a warmer day than I am.
Thank you, Yoni. Ange.
Hi, I'm Ange McManamon. I am VP of Sales at Crunchbase.com. Located in New York, so we're probably around 25, 30 degrees, so a little bit warmer than you, Yoni. But yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. Saving the best topic for last, as well as one of the best here, Ned.
Oh, thank you so much. Ned Leutz, Zoominfo. I run our emerging products sales team, and I'm really excited to be here. I am in Boston, so also freezing cold, but wishing for warmer days.
Awesome. Well, I know we could talk about the weather, but I think the audience would rather talk about comp. And one of the things that I know we talked about preparing for this conversation was really how do we use this as a tool to really maintain and really grow our organization. And one of those kind of holy grail metrics is how do we get our teams at 90% of hitting 100% of our OTE. So I'm really excited to learn from all of you. And one of the things that I wanted to kick us off with is, I think the easy answer would be to lower the targets, right? We'd definitely be able to get 90% of the team at 100% if we just lowered the target, but that just doesn't work these days. And so I wanted to get first, Yoni, in our conversations, you really brought to light how crucial setting appropriate targets are and the psychology behind it. So Yoni, would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks. The target setting is probably one of the hardest things to do, because you always think, is it art, is it science? But there's definitely a lot of data behind it. And the important thing is not just the targets working for the company, but how our teams perceive that target, right? And you kind of mentioned the idea of the psychology behind the target. There's this whole concept of the psychological distance that our reps perceive their targets. And first and foremost, it has to be attainable. But what does that mean, right? There's the idea of this temporal distance, which is the time base between kind of the activity you do and when you're going to receive any reward for achieving the target. There's also spatial distance, which is a bit more physical. But what I actually like most is the social element around the target setting. And it's the idea, you mentioned 90% of people hitting their OTE. When you look at a sales team and they realize that 70%, 80% are hitting their quota, right? There's that social element around, well, if I'm not hitting my quota, they create this, what's called an internal locus of control, and they feel like it's their fault or they can control it, right? Where if you're an organization, and I've been in large organizations like IBM or small startups like Varicent, and sometimes you're in a group where 30% is hitting their quota, all of a sudden failure or missing your quota seems acceptable and kind of the norm, and all of a sudden there's a little bit of absolving responsibility. So being able to ensure that it's kind of attainable, but that the reps kind of also understand how to get there is a big piece of it.
I love that point, because when I think about setting quota, it's like this Excel exercise, right? But it's not. You have to take into that that people aspect, and one of the things that you brought up is just as Yoni mentioned, was all about how do we make it really simple, right? How do we make it as easy as possible for people to understand how to hit their goals? And you brought up just how important it is to keep comp plans simple.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that's really hard depending on where the business is and what you're trying to achieve that year. But I think for me, if I think back to when I was selling, that really motivated me. When I was able to quickly do the calculation in my head of every month, I knew what I was going to get for my commission check. And so, yeah, trying to keep it simple versus what the company needs that year. It can be challenging though, for sure. But I think that's how I try to kind of go to the Excel and do the assignment when I start to plan.
Awesome. I think that makes a lot of sense. Is balancing the two, right? How do you balance the business needs, but what's actually capable, and make it really motivating? So couldn't agree more. And one of our attendees asked a great question from a motivational perspective, with the goal of the highest quota retirement. Is it better to make it attainable and using accelerators, or make it a stretch? Yoni, what are your thoughts?
We've probably tried both and failed at either. But my view is attainable has got to be the way, right? For the person who's receiving that quota to understand that there's motivation to get there and that it's within their reach, it just gets them that much more excited and driven to do that. And then the accelerators only help drive overachievement. And there's always the question of, do we overassign quota? Do we make sure we've got a little bit of buffer ahead of time? And it's risky to say no and assign just the quota that's required, or even go a bit below. What we actually find is that drives over attainment. And, we always fight with finance when you're asked that question. And any finance person that says, well, when the reps are going to get to their quota, they're just going to stop, has never met a salesperson. That's when they really go. That's when you see the added momentum. And so my view is, of course, they've got to be reasonable and they can't be cakewalks, but you have to make sure that they're attainable to help to drive that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's right. And I think that first dollar over quota needs to be worth a lot to the reps. Like in my mind, they should be attainable but hard, but that over attainment is like, I don't know, I usually like to see something that's at least a 2x, right? If not 3x reward on that next dollar. And to your point, Yoni, that's when we see folks start to like get really creative and deals start coming out of the woodwork that otherwise, would never have been found if those dollars weren't there, right? Or at least you start to wonder how they found them. And so when we're thinking about setting plans, I think we definitely try to lean into the idea that an OTE is, the expectation for showing up and doing the job. It's what comes after that can be really sweet and rewarding. And by the way, the folks who don't get to the quota or don't, achieve the OTE, I generally lean into the idea that it should be more punishing than just like their percent attainment against the goal, right? And that's where you can get dollars back that you can show to finance to hopefully get them on board with the higher accelerators.
I think that is the perfect blend of that math, right? The accelerators and setting that really great bar for people to really use psychology to just accelerate themselves to a level that they really maybe didn't believe that they could do. But boy, you put those accelerators in place and great things start to happen, which I think is beautiful when it happens and should be celebrated financially as well as with recognition. So
can I ask something? Ned, do you take the same approach with ramping salespeople?
Ramping salespeople, it depends on the segment that they're in, depends on the product that they're given to sell, right? Sales cycles, I think, are a major impact on how I think about ramping, right? But yeah, I want a plan with ramping salespeople that's going to keep them focused on good activity. So probably less about like going and getting really creative for that next deal and really scrappy. It's more about building a solid pipeline, solid foundation, and not setting expectations that are out of whack with what the long-term expectations will be for that person's comp, right? So I guess I'd probably take a different approach, right? I would tend to think more about guaranteeing comp for a certain period of time for a ramping rep, and then managing them really tightly around pipeline creation so that we're setting the right expectation when they're off ramp. I've made the mistake in the opposite direction and put like really sweet rates out there for ramping reps, and it's bit me hard when they come off.
Me too. But there's a fine line. I think there's a balance, I guess, more so because you want them to overachieve. I want them to feel that, excitement of doing more than they're expected in the first 90, 120 days. But yeah, you got to be careful with those accelerators.
Yeah, and I want fast wins, right? Like the best thing you can do with a ramping rep is get them a win quick, right? And kind of get them a taste that they can do the job and get that belief to Yoni's earlier talk around the psychology. And so I try to prioritize that without, creating unnatural behavior within a ramping person.
Beating ramp is also another great thing when I think about modeling, is because that's just icing on the cake that you just didn't plan for in the budget. And another thing that I know I spent a lot of time talking about internally was, we can model the perfect scenario, but what's reality? And the concept of buffer always is debated. Is it 10%? Is it 15%? What's finance going to cut it to? Ned, how do you think about making sure that you have enough quota coverage to hit plan? And what's that buffer look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. Depends what the budget is, right? Like, and this is where I think some of the art of sales forecasting and kind of understanding your business comes into play. In my current iteration, we are a fast growing company with really ambitious targets, and budget is like, man, if we go out and hit the budget, that's a huge number with big success behind it. And there are times when I think if I put a ton of breakage between the budget number and the quota number, I'm just going to set people up to fail. And so I run in my current state, I run pretty lean on breakage. that might be different depending on what product I'm actually quoting out or what segment, right? There might be certain numbers I feel like we've got some room on. In the past, though, when growth goals might have been less ambitious or in other lives, I've definitely leaned into having more breakage on the field if I feel like the budget number is much more attainable. But it really depends on how you feel about the budget number that's out there.
Yeah, right. I mean, just to piggyback on that one, it's if those growth numbers are aggressive and the company hits those growth numbers, then the team should feel that same joy and excitement and feel the benefit of all the work they did to help us get there. So that's, we've struggled in all the groups I've been part of. Do you put a buffer? Do you not? And the first time you take that risk to bring it to at least what your budget is, probably the first time you'll see that the sales team operates at the same level of excitement or challenges, obviously, as the organization, versus having some disparity that you never really want between leadership and the individual contributors.
Yeah, I agree. And, I've been part of those organizations as well. And when you're in the office and you see some people celebrating and others not, that's the challenge that exists if you do have those two levels of goals. Cool. So, one of the questions that we also started chatting about earlier in preparation about this is how important comp plans are when it comes to changing, right? It's one of the things that I kept scratching my head about is, why aren't comp plans universal? SaaS is got so many similarities, but it seems like across every business it's just different. And so change is almost guaranteed. And how do we do that successfully is something I'm still learning. And Yoni, I wanted to get your thoughts on how you think about communicating comp plans and specifically changes.
Yeah, I think just like we talked about earlier, the making a comp plan simple, like the communication needs to be as clear and direct as possible, because a comp plan really is to motivate the team, right? And it's to motivate the behavior that the team takes. And so if they're experiencing too much change, not only do they not trust kind of the direction that they're being asked to go, but behavior doesn't change overnight, right? If you're asking them to drive towards a certain activity or motion or obviously outcome, you need to give some time for sales leadership to manage that, to help motivate them. And so you have to be really clear about kind of what the targets are, right? Obviously, there's an element around designing the right territories and the quotas and making sure that they feel that they understand the data behind it as well. But then most importantly, just sitting down with them and saying, here's how you're going to hit your number. Here's how you're going to make your money. And if things change from a corporate goal and you're now incentivizing a new piece, like the communication is pretty direct with the teams. Hey, we're now going to pay you more for doing this, for driving new logos or for certain terms of contracts. So shift your focus when you're negotiating or funding deals towards that, because that means it's more valuable to us and therefore you. And the thing I like to do the most is sit down with an Excel sheet sometimes and show the team where the loopholes in the comp plans are. Here's exactly how you make money. Here's how you can trust me as a leader that I'm in it for you as well, but also exactly where you should be putting your effort into it.
I love that personal touch, because I think it goes a long way for the reps, and it builds trust along the way. And I know one of the things that we discussed earlier was just how important it was for you to develop those great relationships and having those conversations with rev ops, sales ops, and the managers and collecting feedback. And I'm curious, like, how do those conversations go, and how do you make them productive?
Yep. So trust is everything. And I think I try to be as transparent as possible on just even the planning of the timeline, right? Or the timeline. It's like, okay, we're starting to work on the comp plans like at the end of Q4, right? We'll hopefully have something by the first week of January. And I think given what timeline you try to stay on, when to roll it out, right? The sooner, the better in the year. But I've been part of organizations that just doesn't happen. And so again, making sure you communicate what's going on and where you're at, and then having a high level meeting to talk through what the plan is about. And then sitting down, like Yanni said, individually with Excel sheets, with some tips and tricks, and talking about the year prior and to what like they really can do this year with this plan, letting them digest, right, for a couple of days, and then even coming back to say, do you have any other questions? Do you want to talk about this some more? Because it is such an anxious time for reps. But like you said, Will, this is their pay and they should feel really good about it and motivated. So try to do that.
Absolutely. And, to your point, as early as possible, constant communication. I mean, those all make total sense. And I know, Yoni, you mentioned just sitting down with the reps and showing, how to make money. Ned, you mentioned, showing real examples using data. I'm curious, like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think that's right. And when I think about using data, we try to bring real deals to life, right? Like, so if we're going to roll out a new plan, bring an example of a deal, break down, here's how you would have been paid on this, here's how you're going to be paid on this now, here's why we think this is important, here's how it benefits you, the company, me, right? Our long-term vision, the customer, right? And everything that these folks have said, I think, is spot on. But that's kind of how I think about it. It's like, let me show you what you closed last quarter and how that would pay out on this new plan. And then, to the new rules of the game and what else you could go do to actually juice that even further. But yeah, that's kind of my take there.
Awesome. And I know, I think it was you, Yoni, you mentioned you sit down with Excel and show people how to model it. But a question came in from our audience about, is Excel the tool for comp calculations, or are there other tools out there? I know I've used both. One to get at least let's kick it off to you, Yoni, first. What are your thoughts on Excel or comp tools?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the question. So at Varicent, we're a sales commission software. It's exactly what we do. So all the changes we're talking about, we thrive in that situation. But listen, like, we've probably all here paid comp on Excel. And the hard part is it's really hard to blame Excel for the issues, the overpayments, the underpayments. That's never a good excuse. So that's why, we really specialize in being able to automate that process, making sure it's visible and transparent to our customers' reps. But that also kind of comes into, when we're talking about communication, also like having them understand there's the positives and the negatives, right? Like, a rep always thinks when a comp plan's released, like, how is this going to effectively screw me, right? And so if you haven't ever read the book, Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference, there's this idea of accusation audit. When I start a conversation with the rep, the very first thing I say is, listen, you're probably sitting here thinking, how am I going to get hurt by this comp plan? And be able to show it, whether it's in Excel, whether it's in a solution of ours, and be able to do it with kind of the real deals then mentioned, kind of shows them, yeah, there's some puts and takes, but on average, it's improving. And here's how you can try to drive that improvement. Absolutely paramount to the success of that rep.
And I love that. And I'll probably be using that for the next couple of weeks. So thank you for that.
I do think the comp tool, great idea. Definitely, big fan of using comp tools for sure. And the only gotcha is, make sure you've got the people in place to get the data feeds right and to make sure that the system's nailed and it's monitored and it's, there's someone actually able to run the thing. Because without it, you could put yourself in a tough spot where reps are looking in real time at the comp tool and finding discrepancies in the middle of a quota period, when pay isn't even for 90 days and you're having comp arguments versus, Excel. The nice part about it is there's a black box there. Not pitching using Excel for comp, just saying know what you're getting into before you roll out a comp tool, and then make decisions around how you want to expose that data to the team. Because it can have, if you start exposing a lot of comp data and something's not right, you're going to end up having conversations about comp every day versus, whenever you pay comp. I don't know how you advise. It's a question I would ask you when looking at a comp tool. So. Yeah.
So what do they say in Spider-Man? With great transparency comes great responsibility, right? Isn't that
exactly.
That's 100% it. If you don't have your data house in order, no matter what solution you're using, you're going to have problems. And yes, having it kind of hidden behind a curtain till the end gives you time to get that correct, but there still are issues and they can only escalate. So yeah, it's absolutely about wrangling the data and making sure that you can communicate clearly both before the comp plan's released and in the comp period, like, how they're going to get paid, if there are errors, how you manage them, and being able to do that without an army of people is really the importance of being able to kind of deliver that successfully for the team.
Awesome. And one of the things, you mentioned, both Ned and Yoni, was how important data is in that. And I'm wondering, what are some other factors? Because I could imagine like team size can influence when is the right time to have a comp tool versus Excel. What are other factors people are considering when investing in a tool? And I think having a dedicated resource who can spend the time in there is another one. What else do you find as kind of like, hey, we're ready and we could really benefit from it?
Yeah, I think was that to me? Sorry.
I forgot to say your name. Yes.
There you go. No worries. There are various triggers, and usually it is when everyone's feeling the pain of preparing for the next comp plan, right? And the reality is that it's not dependent on how many people you're paying out. Obviously, the more you're paying, the more risk you're going to be paying on a spreadsheet and the errors that come with that. But just managing the changes. I mean, even if you've got a sales force of 10 to 15 people, being able to model out these exact things of what does this comp plan look like, both to the reps as well as to finance, right? And where are the puts and takes here? Like, that's an arduous activity that some groups don't do, and then after the fact pay for. But be able to do that into a system and have kind of comp plan design be at the forefront of the way you leverage your system is a paramount reason that customers start to leverage it as well. But whether it's data complexity, the need to over configure your comp plans, which sometimes is being able to adapt with the changing times, or just being able to model things out pretty easily. Doing it in a system is a lot easier than doing it on your own.
It's great points, because I know it is a decision a lot of RevOps leaders have to do, a lot of sales leaders do. So thank you for that.
I think to your point, Yanni, it's also really looking at the loopholes, like you mentioned earlier, like thinking through every different angle of how somebody could really absolutely crush it or perhaps get really stuck and then unmotivated and then not perform.
Absolutely.
So one of the questions that just came in was our thoughts on SPIFs. Should they be kind of on top of the base rates and accelerators? When should they be used and why? So didn't know, Ange, if you had any thoughts on how you utilize SPIFs, or maybe not. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think SPIFs are great. I think it keeps the sales team typically like interactive and motivated in ways. And what I try to do is see where we're getting stuck, right? What we need from the business and from our AEs, and where we're kind of getting stuck and those harder deals to close. So again, it could be a lot of factors, but perhaps bringing up that average deal size. Just we're kind of stuck, and we want to make sure that we're really selling more software seats. So to me, it's spiffing on that for whatever, a week or two or a short amount of time to see if that we can improve that. And then kind of looking at the data to see like if it moved the needle or not. Not every SPIF does. Sometimes you think you have a great idea and it just kind of falls flat. But so yeah, I like to put it on top of the comp plan in the guidelines and in what they sign. It's part of like, we will often run SPIFs, and I think that's a nice little extra cherry on top. But again, it depends on where the business is going and where we're seeing blockers and or what we need.
Yeah, we use SPIFs heavily, but it's all about focus, and it's all about the things we hadn't necessarily considered in the comp plan, or that the comp plan doesn't necessarily drive. Pipeline creation, ASP to Ange's point. Maybe it's a particular product focus or driving folks to an event, whatever it might be. It's a way to get quick focus on an item in the business that you're looking to shore up. So I'm a big fan of SPIFs, definitely outside of OTE, outside of commission, outside of base.
Well, yeah, that's actually, I think we started the conversation talking about how do we get to 90% plus of OTE. We weren't talking about how do we get to 90% plus of quota retirement, right? And
Right.
SPIFs, I think, are a big part of it. And part of the decision on SPIFs is really, how do you want to manage your team? Is it a carrot or a stick? And especially, again, given the name of this session, you don't want to lose, reps to a bad comp plan. Carrots are usually the way to go these days, and that's where SPIFs, above and beyond, help you drive focus, help you give added incentive for it, and then you're not taking away the commission for when they actually close the business that they should be getting, right?
That's great points, because I think going through the process, we should plan for SPIFs, but that shouldn't be part of necessarily anything with quota relief or targets. This is specific focus on specific observations that we're trying to test and drive that quick behavior change. So awesome. Love that.
I'm also a big fan of non-monetary SPIFs. I don't know what the rest of the panel thinks, but I find you give a rep $500, gets taxed, they don't even notice it. You take them to a game or send them to a hotel for the night, like with a friend or whatever they want to do, and they remember it forever. So, at least in my opinion, we get more leverage out of non-monetary.
Yeah, if you don't have like unlimited vacation, giving them extra days off, I found it really goes a long way.
Yeah. So at Varicent, we acquired Concert, and the SPIF we gave was for the first handful of reps, Varicent ICM reps that sell Concert, they get Concert tickets. And that got them to open a bunch of new doors, got them to bring in new business. We also have this concept of a waving cat, which is a Japanese prosperity symbol that if you win, then on your Zoom calls, you've got it in the back. Well, I don't have any shelving here, but you have it in the back shelf to kind of show that I won the waving cat award. So definitely helps drive some motivation.
Nice.
Man, I love it. And any other creative SPIFs from the team? Because I just wrote them
funny.
all down.
I was going to ask, do you, Ned and Yanni, do you kind of poll your team to find out what they want outside of the money stuff? But
it's funny because they always say money, but then they never remember the money. We did something at the end of the year where all of our executives kind of ponied up stuff. We even reached out to the board, and then kind of had a big wheel spin for kind of ongoing SPIFs where people could win stuff. So like drive our president's car for a month, go to a board member's vacation home. Like there was real stuff. I think I offered up a foursome of golf. Like one of our other VPs of sales offered up a pool party at his house. Like there was cool stuff on there that you couldn't experience if you couldn't otherwise get. So, but the reps generally say money.
Yeah.
Although they get super pumped about like dinner with the CEO or whatever. Like that's what they remember.
Right.
So.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a great point because it reminded me that I was part of a SPIF, which was a polar plunge off Coney Island once. We didn't hit our target, good or bad. We'll leave that out. But I was on the hook. But unfortunately, I didn't have to or didn't need to. Your choice. Take the plunge. Cool. So when we talk about comp plans, they change. We know they change. We communicate them. We communicate them early. How frequently, Yoni, are you thinking about changing your comp plans? What's your cadence? When is it appropriate? Are there any things that kind of like break that process and you're like, nah, we need to change it right away? What are your thoughts on comp plan and how often you update it?
Yeah, my rule of thumb is that you need some longevity, right? Again, it's going to motivate behavior and you need to make sure that behavior is trained and then they get the benefit of it and they see that pays some fruition. So no shorter than 6 months for us. But even at 6 months, we don't like to structurally change the comp plan. If anything, you may have a realigned quota and territory if we're growing our business. And usually any changes are net positive to the team, right? We've gone through M&A. We've got new products that we want to drive. We maybe have new features that finance does want to pay for, right? Whether it's term of contract or whether it's certain things. So it's more kind of these SPIFs we're talking about, added accelerators. But changing it more frequent than that, it's hard to then spend more time to explain it and then see if the behavior sticks and then see if you're right. So I like to kind of keep it as consistent as possible.
and then 4, trust. I know it's the theme of the day, but it's like, then they expect it. They're like, oh, that's all right. They're going to change it in 6 months anyway. Right. So yeah, I'm a fan of trying to keep it for a year, but updating what needs to be updated, whether, that is realignment of territories or quota. So.
Yeah, and then for things that you do, like that we do introduce, if they're going to be time bound for a whole period, not just a month-long spiff, obviously just communicating that with the reps, like this is only for this next 6 months, and as you kind of get close, this is going away, and obviously we'll find other ways to try to make this lucrative, but that also helps drive the action to, be able to execute by the end of that period. But it's also, we're talking about how do you communicate the positives and the new comp plans, but there are some things you have to communicate, and I like to do that as early as possible, even before it's released, to kind of get people to understand the reasoning and be comfortable with it. And often at the end of that period is a way to do it also.
Yeah, we're in a very similar take. I've done everything from quarterly to annual, and quarterly is definitely too frequent. Depending on the pace of change, annual can be too long. In my experience, I would love to do annual always. Quarterly, I definitely found you burn 4 months of anxiety every year for you just kill your productivity. We're currently doing semi-annual and trying not to change too much in that mid period, but to the point, buy a company, change a spiff within the plan, whatever it might be.
Yeah, when we started Varicent 2 years ago, we had every intention to do annual quotas, annual comp plans, keep it all year, and it was January 2020. So we are very lucky and very fortunate that we decided to do 6-month terms to give us a chance to pivot if we need to.
That makes a lot of sense, and as much as we can plan for the future, we'll say that shit happens, right? And so when that happens, Ange, I'm curious, because I know our goals is to keep it consistent, but those one-offs do happen at times. Want to get your thoughts on what is the right time to do that, or what are the considerations if you need to or should do any type of one-off adjustments?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the same sort of planning you do in the beginning, right? Like thinking through how we need the behavior change, how what the numbers we're trying to achieve. I think it just takes a little bit of thought on consideration as to, if we are really making a big change, how long is it going to take to see the change? All very big questions, but it's really trying to kind of strategize and think through. It's tough. I think, being as transparent as possible, like what we mentioned, when you need to change it, when you need to make that, and helping the AEs and the reps understand why, right? Really, typically in a smaller, high growth startup, they're there for the ride, and they usually believe in the product, hopefully, and can understand the change, right? Because of the direction that the company needs to go. And so really having them on board, and I know it's tough because it will affect their pay ultimately, but I think if you can try and really be transparent and explain the why behind everything, that goes a long way.
Yeah, we were talking about one-offs. When I was at larger organizations like IBM, you didn't have the ability to do it at all, right? Sometimes it's easier. Hey, listen, I can't do it. Blame the mothership, right? And now, a smaller organization, you have more control. But what I learned is you kind of need to have a mantra that you operate by, right? Whether it's my goal is to maximize my reps payment, or I'm always focused on the SPIFs instead of the accelerators, and at least act consistently, even if the rule might need to change here and there. But Ned, I'm interested. I mean, you went the other way, went from a small to now obviously a larger organization. How's that impacting kind of how you're running things now? Obviously, Zoominfo at the state that it's at. Yeah.
I mean, look, we've got a big team that thinks about this stuff all the time. So we try to be extremely thoughtful and data-driven about building the plans. I mean, January 2020 is a great, you said January 2020 and the flashbacks just occurred. But that was a period of time where we saw some interesting dynamics in the business. You can go back and listen to the earnings calls if you want, just become a public company, but enterprise kind of slowed. SMB really took off because SMBs were getting scrappy and figuring out how do they operate online. And so the plan we had modeled, which was, bound to be a great year in enterprise, didn't occur for the first half of the year, right? And so we had to make some adjustments, and we did some creative things mid-period, recognizing that, hey, we're about to save a bunch of comp. right? Because a bunch of people are going to miss. So we went out and put some incentive rates out there, mid-period adjustment, and then we made a pretty wholesale adjustment going into the second half about how we looked at the business. So I think if you can do things like that, you show the reps that you're in the same boat as they are, and they're like the most important conduit to revenue, right? And as long as you can recognize that and not ignore it in real time, you earn a lot of trust and goodwill down the road. But yeah, it was much easier to pivot like on a dime back in the day, but we still have some ability to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
These exceptions occur all the time, and one of the questions that came in from the poll was, do reps make too much? Do sales reps make too much? Is uncapped quota or uncapped potential really good for the org or the culture for maybe departments outside of sales? And so, it's definitely, the potential is there to make as much money as you can, but wanted to see if anyone had any thoughts here. Maybe kick it off with Ned. Like, are uncapped potentials a challenge that you see in your org, or are there any culture issues that you see with that type of comp plan?
That's interesting. You're asking a sales guy if an uncapped comp plan.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to agree.
As thoughtful as I'd like to be, I'm not going to be that thoughtful about this. No, I think uncapped potential is good, right? I think that's kind of the draw to sales. That being said, I think most reps recognize that they've got, limitations of time and kind of the willingness to do the work, right? And to work. There's only so much work you can do, right? But no, I think it generally breeds the right culture. I think the big thing is how you recognize the success of the top performers, right? And how you try to create a cult of excellence versus a cult of mediocrity, right? And I think Yoni had a much more scientific term for it earlier. But it's about putting your best performers on a pedestal without creating a world where people go, well, I'll never be like that guy, and like he's got the best territory and the whole thing's rigged, right? And so we really try to make sure that our top performers who are high earners kind of walk the walk with the swagger, but make sure that they're also bringing people up with them and showing others how to get it done. If you don't have that, you're going to end up in a situation with a bunch of people who want to shank them in the parking lot and don't believe that the system's actually there for them to achieve the same thing. So, yeah, that's how I tend to think about it. But I definitely think uncapped is good, as long as you also hold those folks accountable to bring the rest of the org up around them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think whether you cap or don't cap the earnings, sales is always in a bit of a glass house, right? The earnings that sales has versus the organization is always looked at a little differently. So one is, regardless of that decision, we as sales always have to kind of be accepting of that and know how we interact internally really does matter, because we kind of live in our own glass house and you don't want to be throwing stones. But when we spun out of IBM, so I'm at Varicent now. Varicent, although it's a 2-year-old company, was part of IBM, and even beforehand was a company called Varicent. So it's been in business for a while. We've seen some of those types of comp plans that had caps or decelerators. And again, it's about motivating behavior. Like, does any company really want a seller just to put their foot off the gas in November because they're at their cap or they're at a decelerator and they know they can move it to the next quarter? Most groups, including finance, will say, no, we don't want you to put the foot off the gas, right? And as long as the culture kind of supports that, hey, your top performers aren't just the people who just sell a lot and it's bluebirds that happen and now they're getting paid a lot of money, is that you actually see the work and the thoughtfulness and the effort put into those deals, then those top performers should be rewarded. And in most sales organizations, the culture is to not to look upon that negatively, but to almost like use that competitive goal as like, hey, I want to get there, and how do I do it, and kind of team together to learn from those top performers, as opposed to looking upon it like negatively.
Yeah, and from a rev ops perspective, and I've had customer success roles, and I've seen, sales quotas achieved and amazing paychecks as a result. And one of the perspectives that I always looked at upon is that's great for me too, right? Because if someone's beating their plan, there's a possibility everybody beats their plan. And I've been in startups for a long time, and I've been close to the numbers. Like, I can physically feel the difference when someone beats their plan, because that means we get more resources next quarter. It is such an instant feedback loop in such a smaller company that you actually get to see that value play out really quickly. So I've always appreciated those uncapped potentials and look upon it as a benefit for me as well, because that means I get more resources along with everyone else in the company. And I think that's a really healthy way to look at it.
Yeah, and even before the pandemic, we would always send almost every deal that we closed, like a ring the bell email, say like kind of everyone's part of the win. And up until the pandemic, when we started interacting more on Zoom, we heard dev talking about it and product marketing, and they felt accountable for that win as well. So then if they hear or see one of the sales reps getting paid a lot of money, they're like, well, we saw them on those notes quite a bit, and they felt like they contributed to that person's success as well. So that there's definitely a cultural element that kind of helps drive that success.
I couldn't agree more. Cool. One of the things that we asked our attendees was just where they are in their comp planning process. About 50% are assigning quotas, 50% are docs are signed. Was curious around the horn, starting with you, Ange. Where are you in your process?
Docs are signed.
Awesome.
That was like really one of my goals, to get it before mid-January, and we just finished it yesterday. So that's a huge accomplishment, because you always want to do it as early as possible. So I'm excited.
Totally.
That's amazing. Yoni, what about you? Where are you in your process?
I am glad you're asking this half and not a half or two before. But I've taken over our sales ops team in the last year as well. And part of the whole plan was, how do you get the planning done right with the territories, the quotas, all the comp plan changes, and working with finance as a partner as opposed to a competitor. And we were able to do that where everything was basically sealed and buttoned by end of December. And then we used the first 2 weeks of January to make any last minute pivots, right? On quota, on alignment. And so docs are signed. We're thankfully in a good spot, but I'm glad you didn't ask this 6 months ago. Might have been a different story.
Love it. I want to hear more from both of you about how you were able to accomplish that. But Ned, rounding us out first, where are you?
Yeah, we are aligned on targets and in the process of rolling them out. So we've rolled out in new business and account management, which is great, faster than ever. So cheers to our comp team. My org overlays on top of both of those orgs, and it creates more complexity. So we are done with that planning, and we're getting it into the wild next week. So awesome. Faster than ever, I will say. I'm impressed that you guys are already done. That's amazing.
What's the secret?
Yeah, what is the secret?
Ange?
I don't know if there's a secret, or just like really just spending multiple days in December. I really blocked a lot of time off in December just to do it and work on it and sit down with finance and my RevOps team. So yeah, I don't know if there's a secret sauce there. It was a big goal for me as a leader, and so I was able to hit that one.
Yeah, I mean, I have the fortunate advantage of being in a company that's all around SPM, territory and quota planning and compensation and getting the targets right. So that obviously helps us know that there's an organizational focus on it. But like Ange said, we started planning for it in early September. We had all of our, alignments with sales VPs on what do they like about the comp plans, what do they not like, what are some of the blind spots we didn't perceive on the previous ones, and kind of drove to a timeline that kind of got us almost ready by the end of Thanksgiving, so that month of December we weren't then focused on that and could focus on closing out business. So again, fortunate ability to be part of a group that prioritizes that in our kind of what we do. But we also are finally kind of getting into that right direction, but it's just got to be a priority for the whole team.
It's a really good point, though. I think surveying the reps and asking about the current year plan or their plan is really important, right? Because if there is just a common theme there that we may probably know as leaders anyway, but just like hearing that, it just helps with the planning. So
Yeah, and one thing, I mean, we sales leaders, we know this, right? That comp is a sensitive thing, right? It's really the crux of like the corporate objectives and obviously how people are going to get paid. So I think we appreciate it. I think it's getting the sales ops team and finance to not look at it just like, I think Ned, you said it before, just like numbers on a spreadsheet. It really is like, how do we make sure we do this right? Because it's the most important thing that's going to drive our salespeople's performance. So it's looking at that priority.
I think the theme that I pulled from both of you is it's got to be a priority across the multiple stakeholders, and I think that's incredibly helpful because I have not rolled out ours with full intentions to do so, but next year or next round, because also learning that semi-annually seems to be definitely the path forward. So learning a lot in my front row seat here. So thank you for all those tips. I did want to talk about one more thing before we go into kind of our last tweet length recommendations for our audience. Ned, this was a conversation we just didn't complete in our backstage prep session about paying on cash versus paying on bookings. You made the transition, or at least I think you were mentioning when Zoominfo and Discover.org merged, you witnessed it. What are some things to consider when you're having those conversations?
Yeah, I think it's a big change, right, for a rep to get their head around, because all of a sudden that instant gratification kind of goes out the window. It also depends on when you pay and how frequently you pay. Like in the org that this affected, we pay monthly, right? And so like instant gratification could be closing a deal on the 31st of the month and getting paid on the 15th, right? That's pretty quick. And if you're moving to cash, a buyer might not pay for 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, never in some cases, right? So we had to build a bridge, right? And help the reps understand how this wasn't going to like leave them without money to pay rent and all the other concerns that they had along the way. So we kind of built a draw effectively, right? Where they would get a guaranteed payment that would then kind of disintegrate as cash came in the door to kind of get them to the point where they now get paid on cash. What I can say is, having gone through that transition, and by the way, we pay on cash collected too on multi-years. Having gone through that transition, the reps who've been with us for a long time have this like annuity stream, right? Where it's this ongoing pay that's coming in, especially on those multi-year contracts, where they can walk into a new year and say, hey, I've already got, X thousands of dollars coming to me before I even sell a single deal. And what the real benefit of that from a management perspective is it's a great retention tool, right? Like if you're a rep who's worked for us for 4 years and you're walking into $40,000 next year without even picking up the phone, you got to still do your job, or you might lose your job and not get paid on that cash. But it sort of makes that call you might get about that other opportunity less attractive. And so that was one of the kind of ancillary benefits that we found of moving our new business team to cash collected.
I think those are really good points, because I think depending on your organization, you might think about actually optimizing for that instant gratification and really kind of using the psychology of action to benefit and closing that time so that habit is starting to form stronger and stronger. Closed deals get money. Closed deals get money. I see arguments on both sides, and I think it just depends on your organizational strategy.
Yeah. Part of it's also just kind of your go-to-market, right? Your teams. Are your sellers hunters, or are they hunters and also account executives? And what level of involvement do you want them to maintain in those accounts post-close? Totally has an impact to that decision. We pay on bookings, but we don't release the payment until kind of the first invoice is paid. We kind of give a window, right? If it's within a certain amount of window, we just pay the next month. But if a rep does give a delayed payment for the very first invoice and it's beyond a certain threshold, then it does impact them, which somewhat is a retainment piece. But what we've seen is that the going on cash, there's just even more onus on the transparency piece, which of course can be done, but it also comes with a lot of responsibility and is important to ensure that you're kind of showing the team how and where that's coming.
Yeah, it definitely creates more data complexity and more visibility that you need to put into that. And by the way, if you don't pay and the rep can see that the customer paid, right, now you're having that conversation and scrambling to get payroll to go cut a check. So yeah, I totally hear you.
I don't recommend paying on cash when you're paying on spreadsheets, put it that way.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Awesome. So I'm looking at the clock. Time flies when you're having this much fun. But Taylor, I promised to end on time. So we're going to focus on our tweet length recaps from around the horn. So what I'm going to do is just hand it off to you, Ange, and share with the group your kind of one key moment to really think about when you think about comp.
I think for me, it's making SPIFs as fun and motivational as possible. And it can be hard, but I think, gathering feedback, talking to managers and directors, and making them, whether they're monetary or not, kind of always having those throughout the year.
Awesome. Yoni.
For me, it's all about behavior, right? Comp, obviously, we know motivates behavior. So when you're designing a comp plan or looking at a comp plan, think about the behavior you want that team to do and ensure that it's active, right? The comp plan is saying, what do I need to do, right? I need to do this in order to be able to get to my OTE versus a passive comp plan, which is, I get this, that this is just something I'm going to get inherently to be able to drive the behavior that we're going to drive.
Awesome. Ned, rounding us out.
Yeah, I think get more stakeholders in the boat on comp planning, right? More eyes will test your theories and bring points of view that you might not have considered.
Awesome. And I'm going to ask myself my big takeaway.
Will, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's make it a priority. Make it a priority because it's people's paycheck. And so I think that's been a huge learning for me. So thank you, Ange, Yoni, and Ned for this conversation. And Taylor, just handing the floor over to you.
Amazing. Look at that timing. 2 minutes to spare. Thank you, Will, Ange, Ned, Yoni. This was fantastic. A great way to end our 3 days together. Thank you to our sponsors and to everyone who has come to all of our events and has been super lively in the chat. We really, really appreciate it. We hope you learned a lot. And we'll see you at our next summit in April. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.